We have been conditioned to believe that a higher capacity for thought is an evolutionary shield against suffering, but the data suggests a much darker reality. For the deep thinker, the brain isn't just an organ of logic, it is a high-performance engine that often overheats because it lacks an internal cooling system. While society prizes the analytical mind, that same depth of processing can lead to a specific visceral type of depression that is often misdiagnosed as simple sadness. It's not a lack of chemical balance alone, but really a byproduct of a mind that sees too much, feels too much, and can no longer ignore the patterns of a fractured world. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was blessed with the gift of true prophecy, but cursed so that no one would ever believe her. This is the precise psychological architecture of the deep thinker's depression. You possess the intellectual clarity to see the coming storm, the breakdown of a relationship, the instability of a career, or the existential void of modern life, yet you feel utterly powerless to stop the momentum. This Cassandra Complex creates a profound sense of isolation where your internal reality is constantly at odds with the surface-level optimism of the world around you. When your brain is wired for deep pattern recognition, you don't just see events, you see the inevitable conclusions of those events, leading to a state of chronic anticipatory grief that mimics clinical depression, but is actually a crisis of overperception. At the biological level, the deep thinker's brain often exhibits hyperconnectivity in the default mode network, or the DMN. This is the region responsible for self-reflection, ruminating on the past, and simulating the future. While this network allows for incredible creativity and problem-solving, in the deep thinker, it becomes a closed loop. Instead of using thought to solve a problem, the brain begins to treat the thought itself as the reality. This results in analytical rumination, where the prefrontal cortex becomes locked in an exhaustive search for a solution to existential questions that have no objective answer. You aren't depressed because you are broken. You are depressed because your brain is attempting to solve the problem of existence using the same logic it uses to solve a math equation, and the resulting failure feels like a personal collapse. Deep thinkers often suffer from what psychologists call disintegration, a state where your high ideals and complex understanding of the world clash violently with the mundane requirements of daily life. This creates a cognitive dissonance that just drains your neurotransmitter reserves. While others can find satisfaction in the autopilot of routine, the deep thinker requires a higher meaning-to-effort ratio. If a task doesn't connect to a larger purpose or a systemic truth, your brain effectively withholds dopamine, making even simple chores feel like a Herculean labor. This isn't laziness, it is a biological protest against a life that feels intellectually and spiritually thin. The profound sadness felt by the highly intelligent is often what we call existential depression, and it's triggered by the realization of personal insignificance or, the arbitrariness of societal structures. Once you've peeked behind the curtain and realized just how much of our world is built on these fragile illusions, you really can't just unsee it. It leads to a loss of the positive illusions that keep most people mentally stable. Most individuals have this slight optimistic bias that sort of filters out the harshness of reality, but for the deep thinker, that filter is just way more porous. You end up seeing the world with a kind of stark, cold objectivity that can honestly be pretty terrifying. But to heal, you have to learn to move from nihilistic pessimism, where nothing matters so nothing feels worth doing, to optimistic nihilism, where the lack of inherent meaning actually gives you the absolute freedom to create your own. To manage this neurological profile, you really need to implement a strict protocol designed to move the brain from global processing mode to local somatic mode. The deep thinker's primary enemy is, without a doubt, abstraction. So, to counter this, you have to engage in what's called sensory bridging for exactly 15 minutes every morning, right at the moment of waking. This means zero digital input, no phones, no news, no abstractions at all. You must force your brain to identify 5 distinct physical textures, 3 unique scents, and 4 specific sounds in your immediate environment. This recalibrates the DMN and prevents your brain from immediately leaping into the abstraction trap, where it starts solving the day's existential problems before your feet have even touched the floor. The second part of the protocol requires a specific cognitive exercise called the Objective Partition. When you identify a future negative pattern, a Cassandra moment, you must, physically write it down in two columns. The first column is the observed truth, and the second is the controllable variable. You know, deep thinkers often spiral because they conflate seeing a problem with the responsibility of fixing it. By forcing your brain to categorize what is outside your sphere of influence, you create a containment field for your intellect. This prevents your analytical energy from leaking into areas where it only causes distress, without the possibility of resolution. You do this twice daily, once at noon and once before sleep, just to make sure the engine of the mind is properly cooled down. The final step in your growth is the transition from isolation to selective vulnerability. Deep thinkers often hide their true thoughts because they fear being too much for others, which honestly only deepens the depression. You must, seek out intellectual mirrors, environments or people who can handle the complexity of your thoughts without flinching. This doesn't mean finding people who agree with you, but people who operate at the same depth. Social isolation for a deep thinker is a neurochemical toxin. It accelerates the degradation of serotonin because the brain feels it is shouting into a void. Engaging in high-level, abstract debate or creative collaboration serves as a venting mechanism for the pressure built up by your internal observations. Your depth is not a defect, and your sensitivity to the world's shadows is not a sign of weakness. It is actually a sign of a highly tuned instrument that has been played in an environment it wasn't built for. The depression you feel is the signal that your mind is hungry for a level of truth and purpose that your current environment isn't providing. By implementing the grounding protocols and understanding the biological roots of your rumination, you can stop being a victim of your own intellect. You can turn the curse of Cassandra into a tool for profound personal and societal transformation, using your sight not to predict doom, but to navigate toward a more conscious and meaningful existence. If this brain map of the deep thinker's mind helped you understand your own internal landscape better, please, share it with one person you know who struggles with the weight of their own thoughts. We are building a community based on science-backed growth and intellectual honesty, and we would love for you to be a part of it. Subscribe to join us for the next deep dive into the mechanics of the human psyche.